Hello there, friends. Brian King here. The new school year is right around the corner, and you and I both know that this is something that a lot of parents and teachers dread, especially when it comes to the students that have a particularly difficult time learning. And we know that we don't have the knowledge or the skills that we need to really meet them where they're at and give them the best chance for success. Now, the stuff that teachers are used to getting, in my opinion, is far too general to be useful in the classroom. Maybe it can help you a little bit, but it's on the individual level where you're going to have the greatest impact. And I totally understand classroom sizes are getting bigger. The pile of paperwork you're responsible for is getting higher. But trust me when I tell you, you can still engage kids on an individual level, even if things seem to be getting out of control or getting too big for you to manage. And I'll explain how in just a minute. But first, let me give a little context to our conversation here. I posed a question on a couple social media profiles asking the teachers in my community, what's the number one challenge you have with your students that have ADHD? And there were things like not being able to give individual attention, not having enough time for instruction. But the one consistency that I've seen time and time again is the frustration with helping the child follow through consistently. Where you give them the instruction and they don't even start. You give them homework, maybe they do it, but they don't turn it in. Or if they do it, it's incomplete, or they didn't follow the directions. So there's a lot of frustration around just helping your child produce, execute the way you instructed. So here's the word that we're going to use. And it's the umbrella for all of these challenges, and that word is follow through. And that's where you really need to focus, is what skills and knowledge and supports does your child, your student with ADHD need in order to follow through consistently? Now, when you break down all the different executive functions, and I won't get into all of them because there are just so many, you can look and see, where does this executive function sabotage my child's ability to follow through? One of them is task initiation. That's getting started. Okay, so if your child has a hard time getting started, you need strategies to help them get started so they can follow through more effectively at getting started. Make sense? And you can go through the executive functions and see, where does this child struggle? Because if I can help shore these abilities up, then follow through becomes easier for this child to accomplish, and you as the teacher get far more of what it is you need. Now, what are the things that sabotage follow through? Well, there are the easy to identify, the things that you see, those easy targets, the school environment. Well, maybe there's too much noise during a test and your child's too distractible. Okay, give them a separate place where they can study quietly. Well, that handles that problem, but it doesn't handle the problem of test anxiety. That's something that's internal. And the internal stuff is the stuff that we tend to miss. Or if we can't think about anything at school that might be the issue, because you've done your best to surround this child with bubble wrap so that they don't melt down, they don't react, they don't disrupt the classroom, that they are contained as much as possible so that the teacher can instruct the rest of the students, which honestly is a reasonable priority. So if the problem isn't at home, not necessarily, parents get impatient, they yell at their kids. Kids can become feeling bad about themselves because their parents are on their case all the time. There are all kinds of reasons why a child might be anxious or distracted or preoccupied with other matters when you would like them to be focused on their classwork. But the one area where teachers and parents alike tend to not do much work at all when they're helping their ADHD student learn how to follow through is they do not address the student's worldview about their own education, meaning the child's belief system. What they'll do is they'll come up with point charts and behavior charts and all these things to apply negative aversive leverage on this child to get them to move from this standpoint. In a lot of cases, maybe it works because the fear of the repercussion does what? What does fear do in your nervous system? It increases adrenaline. It may increase, other brain chemicals, wonderful focus chemicals that improve a child's ability to focus. It creates a sense of urgency, kind of like cramming for a test at the last minute, and can create that internal environment where a child can suddenly be focused and more productive and follow through. But this is no way to live, folks. We don't want our kids to be trained to always be afraid of the dragon or the consequences coming down the pike if they don't step up. You want to help them develop that internal wherewithal, that internal structure of empowered beliefs, so that when they show up, they feel like they can do this, okay? So how do you start tapping in to what their worldview is? Well, I have a couple questions that I like to ask. You can ask the child, so tell me what you're good at. Because what you want to find out is, do they think they're good at anything? Because there are some students that don't give themselves credit where it's due, because they're so used to their disappointing acts or their mistakes being pointed out and corrected that they think the only thing that matters is how often they're screwing up, because so little of the feedback they get is positive. Secondly, ask them, so do you think you're smart? You think you're a good student? You want to know this because sometimes, and I've heard this from teachers, they take for granted that students are enthusiastic about education. Wrong. Now, it's not to say that kids are not curious. They are. But when it comes to the kind of education that you're thinking about, in many ways, it sets kids up for failure, puts them in an environment of intense pressure and scrutiny to where mistakes, if they are made, are drawn attention to, they're scolded, they're shamed, even against your best efforts. I'm not saying every teacher does this, but it happens enough that it needs to be addressed. And that kind of learning environment does not support a child with fragile self-concept. It doesn't support them in believing in themselves and thinking they're a good student. Okay? It doesn't make them think smart. Thirdly, at this point, you can ask them, if there's something you wanted to become better at, do you believe you're capable of learning the skills you need to do it better? Now, you can give them a specific example. Let's say there's something they want to learn, like electric guitar, or they want to become better at skateboarding. Ask them, do you think you're capable of learning the skills needed to become better at that? What you're checking for here is, does this child have a growth or a fixed mindset? A growth mindset means that they believe that they have the capacity to improve themselves and improve upon their present circumstances. A fixed mindset means you think you're pretty much stuck with what you got and you're stuck where you are and things aren't going to get better. We need to know this before we expect the child to sit down and embrace this idea that you're smart, you can grow, you can improve things. If the child's worldview is the opposite of that, they're going to sit there, resist you at every move, because you're asking them to engage in something they've already decided is absolutely futile. Lastly, one thing I ask students a lot is, if you were to ask a teacher for help, do you expect to get the help you need? Because one of the big goals in a lot of IEPs is increased self-advocacy. Well, one thing I make sure of when it's put in there is this child needs to have a consistently positive result whenever they self-advocate. So the teacher that's asking for increased self-advocacy, you better be ready to show up for that kid when it happens. Because if you keep blowing them off and telling them to wait and go sit down, you're with somebody else, and that's the pattern of how you respond, this child is going to feel like they're talking to a wall. So there has to be some kind of a discussion around, how do I know that as a student, how do I know I've been heard? How do I know I'm being taken seriously? How do I know I'm going to get help? Or am I just going to be made to feel invisible and brushed aside? And another thing I hear a lot from students is they don't ask for help because they really don't have the self-awareness to know what the problem actually is. They just know something's not working. For some reason, they just can't take what they know in their head and get it out and produce for you in the way you want it. They're not aware of their own executive function challenges or even what executive function challenges are. But they are struggling. So helping them to find language to describe what the issue is so that they can articulate it to the teacher, to the aide, to whoever is going to help them. And lastly, learning style. One of the frustrations that a lot of these kiddos have is that they ask for help, but they don't get it in a way that they can use. Maybe they're visual and they're given an auditory instruction. Maybe they need a worksheet and they're being told to write it out themselves or whatever it is. But the point being is that they need a specific kind of support and they're not getting it that way. And again, this is not the teacher's fault. This is simply a miscommunication. And the more we get to understand the student's way of learning, and we can get this all from the student. That's the beautiful thing here. It's not something that we need to use telepathy for or observe the child and try and figure out what is this child thinking without talking to this child to find out what this child's thinking. If you know what questions to ask, you can get all the information you need from that child about how they feel about themselves, about education, about their chances of being a better student, and what beliefs are holding them back so that we can shift that internal dialogue, give them the inner structure they need to show up and be able to plow through those things that are standing in the way instead of always being hampered by them. So that is what I offer you. Hopefully this is something that's been helpful. If you are a teacher, a school administrator, somebody who wants to explore how these strategies can really make a difference in your classroom for the life of your teachers, your aides, students, whether they have ADHD or not, then let's talk. And we can go into more detail about the laser-focused solutions that I offer that can help fill in the knowledge and skill gaps of your staff and your students so that everybody can feel successful. This has been Brian. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for being you.